Hi, this is Tom for PokerVIP.com and welcome to part 2 of my review of John's bankroll challenge on BetSafe. So we're going to review the second half hour of raw footage he showed us. There's going to be some interesting spots, and then we're going to do an overall summary of what we think he's doing well and what we think he needs to work on in the long term, and then maybe like do another review in a couple of months' time, see how he's progressed, and see how his bankroll challenges on both sites, are progressing at that point. So we're going to roll the footage, and yeah. First up, we are going to see the Ace Jack 9-3 double suited. So we like the fact that John is going to be folding here. He did think about calling momentarily, but it kind of illustrates, going back to the previous video, that if he's going to be folding this kind of stuff to, to a cold 3-bet when he's out of position, it just really illustrates how, calling with hands like Queen 10-6-5 double suited is going to be a losing play. If he doesn't consider this one to be strong enough, then the other clearly isn't. And we made the general point about overcalling 3-bets being a losing play anyway. We would just make a note that Millie has potted in a spot where it's impossible for them to have the nuts, so we'd just make that general observation. But other than that, seems pretty standard. Left-hand table, pretty standard open, and I believe this player is the player that was playing loosey-goosey last time that we stacked with aces, I believe, in the last video. So yeah, just a weird lead, but absolutely fine for us to give up with the bottom pair there. Absolutely fine. Left-hand table again, another double suited hand, cut off, perfectly reasonable open. Ideally we'd want spades to be jack-eye, but kind of everything. It's still a pretty good hand all in all. And yeah, not much more needs to be said on that one. I don't think it's reasonably standard. Oh wait, yeah, there was the flop actually. We'll take the flop. So it's a reasonably good flop for us. If you just pause it here momentarily. So top and bottom, it's one of the better flops we can have, but obviously it's a super connected board. So the line I would like here, if it's straight round to us, which seems like the most logical thing for us for it to happen, is bet here, bet on the large side, size up, and fold if we happen to face any serious action. Just because of this super connected board, we expect all two pairs to fast play. 10 deuce I doubt will, but Jack 10 sets and big combo draws like Ace King Queen with clubs, King Queen 9 with clubs, I guess 9-8-7 with clubs, although that one's less likely. So we're either slightly behind the combo draws or crushed by the higher two pairs of sets. So we're a fan of him betting here, but betting with a plan to fold if he happens to get serious amounts of action. He sizes up, which is nice. You could even pot here if you wanted to. And I believe he just gets it through. But yeah, as long as we have the mindset that we're going to be ditching it if if the raise comes in, then we're a big fan of the way he's played it. He's not allowing free cards. He's not undersizing and inducing action in the spot he doesn't want to induce action. So yeah, he's played that one pretty damn well. We're happy with what we've seen so far. And there's going to be one more hand before we skip the tape on a little bit. And it's going to be on the right-hand table with the double suited ace. So button opens and John is going to defend. So this is going to be a general point and one that I will also touch on in like closing statements type thing. John decides to call here, and I like the call. I think the call's far better than the 3-bet. It's not a strong enough hand to 3-bet, and we have a pulling hand where if this were a situation where it could go multi-way, this hand is going to benefit from going multi-way, just from the fact that we can make nut flushes and we want more people in the pot, increase the probability of someone having a lower flush that can pay us off. Obviously, in this heads-up dynamic, it's that's not really such an issue, but it's a general point about the hand. And it's also just suffers from kicker problems when we 3-bet. We're going to get called by a decent amount of ace-x, and most of those ace-x's are going to have higher kickers. So it basically means we have to flop better than we would do with a typical 3-bet ace-high hand, something like an ace-king with a couple of decent cards, ace-queen with a couple of decent cards, connecting suit and that sort of stuff. So yeah, but we have seen John 3-bet some hands in the previous video, I think. If I go back through my notes, I think it was, some medium strength aces. I can't find the hand exactly off the top of my head, but some medium strength aces, which I've seen him do generally, and we're going to touch on why we want him to cut that out. So we're a far bigger fan of him calling here than, anything, too aggressive, opening himself up to effectively 3-bet and turn A, pulling a hand into a pushing hand, and not really play the hand in an optimal way. As played on flop, absolutely fine. We're going to skip it forward a minute or so. Yeah, John folds the Jack 7-7-5. We like folding here. The rainbow variety, if we've got some suits with it, we can consider opening and cut off, but rainbow wise, it's just not going to have enough playability post flop, so we're a big fan of that. Again, he's showing some good discipline that he wasn't necessarily showing previously, in the previous Betfair series. So, we like the fact that he's reining it in a bit, he's tightening ranges and playing a bit more optimally. As I say that, he is going to open here, and we're just going to pause this. So we did touch on in previous videos as to John overvaluing low connectivity, and unfortunately he's at it again. So effectively this hand is just rubbish. It's not going to play particularly well. If we think about the 3 tenets again, which I keep going on about, but bears repeating just to get him out of this bad habit, that we want the connectivity, we want the suitedness, and we want the high cards. We don't have high cards. Connectivity is very weak. Just the very nature of a wheel means there are fewer straight combos for you to make, and you're going to make the lower end of straights as well. And suitedness, we have a 3 high flush. We're not really factoring this into any suitedness. So again, we put some things through Odds Oracle just to illustrate the point, as my internet decides to be very slow and not load the hand, which is frustrating. Why is that not loading? Here we go. It's taking its sweet time and frustrating me. Apologies as to why it's taking so long. Here we go. Right, so I just put in what type of hands we'd expect to flop, and rather than put it in raw data form, which I have been doing previous, I thought maybe putting it in a graph would help illustrate the point a bit more. You see, we really want basically the lower down in here, the higher the percentages in the categories lower down, the better, effectively. So we're looking to make top pair and up, really, considerably. And of course, hands with really good suitedness and really good connectivity are going to flop top pair with redraws, etc., which we could input here, but then it gets super complex in terms of graphs, etc. So we're just looking at, kind of like raw data here. So yeah, basically it's just under pairs, it's third pairs, and it's junky. So I also asked the question, how often do we have the nut high on the river? And 1.8% comes to it. So we can conclude that the hand does not have rear end nuttiness, that we're not going to make, whereas big double suited aces, big double suited broadways are going to make nut straights, nut flushes on rivers and have the back end nuttiness that we've been talking about. We can conclude this hand most definitely doesn't. So again, very same results here, but we asked how often to make the nut high on the flop, and it's an even lower percentage. It's just under 1.4%. So we can conclude that the hand doesn't have front end nuttiness, and that's a reasonably logical conclusion to make, because we're never going to make top set with it. And it's very unlikely that we have a flop, nut straights, etc. on flop. So the hand doesn't have front end nuttiness, the hand doesn't have rear end nuttiness. So effectively, we're never going to make the nuts. Omaha is a game of making the nuts and cooling our opponents, and good pre-flop hand selection is going to be essential to achieve that. And this just isn't really going to fit any of those criteria. So it's something that we really want John to focus on, just to really stop overvaluing low connectivity, whether it be suited, rainbow, paired, or just a really low rundown. We're just looking for him to just cut this out of pretty much every range. This wouldn't be in a button range. Even raising 50%, this isn't going to be in it. This is going to be like a bottom 25% hand that we just don't want to play. The flop here kind of illustrates that point, and then we make bottom pair, but it's worth nothing. Opening in early position also means this hand is more likely to go multi-way, which, to be honest, it's a rubbish hand, so it's not going to benefit as to whether it goes multi-way or not, but, going multi-way further accentuates the problem the hand has. So yeah, that's one really key thing that we want him to focus on, is just, removing that from, all ranges altogether. It's just going to create all sorts of problems. So we've got a couple of hands going on these tables. We're going to touch on the left-hand table first. And we have a decent connected suited ace, and John elects to fold. And just a point that we can call here, assuming that we don't have a big blind that's going to be very aggressive and three betting a lot, so he's going to be a bit player dependent. We've seen tappers calling a lot, so we're going to reasonably assume he's not going to be three betting particularly high. HUD really going to help with those kind of stats. It's 2 weeks three bet, but we're absolutely fine with potentially calling. It's doing well versus 50% range, and just just taking a flop and playing flops accordingly. The right hand table we have king 3 and actually 3 kings and a 3, and we get limped on. We're absolutely fine with the ISO, and again we're just going to illustrate as to why that is the case. So I inputted a range of 20 to 55%. I'm going to assume the top 20% are raising, pretty reasonable conclusion. And you can see that in pure hot and cold we're doing reasonably well. This hand is going to suffer from some problems in sort of post-play plot, but we are going to be able to pick it up a decent amount of time. We're still going to pair of kings, which is likely to be the best hand on a good chunk of flops. So we're okay with this. We're going to play the hand in position. The only thing we really fear is a back raise, which is super unlikely and also very nutted, in which case we can just throw the hand away. But yeah, we're happy with the way this is played. We get a pretty awful flop, truthfully, and I believe Inachi is going to lead off memory. And we're just going to pause it there, and I'm going to pull up the odds oracle. So this again assumes that we're all in, that there's no further action, etc. We inputted the flop, and it's basically just to illustrate that the range we gave him pre-flop, this flop's going to heavily favour the calling range, as opposed to the king 3 range, which is pretty reasonable. He's going to have a lot of middling connected cards that he limps, that kind of stuff, some middling pairs. He's going to make a lot of two pairs, bottom two, occasionally some weak sets that he's limped in and happens to have flop gin with, some 13 card straight draws, that sort of stuff. So he's got enough connectivity here, and I think it's absolutely fine for us to just fold this flop given the lack of redraws we have with this hand. John goes for the call, and he's going to ditch it on a turn card that is pretty much as bad as can be, but I think we just fold that street early. We don't really need to effectively chase in the hope that our opponent shuts down, which seems unlikely if they're leading. We get a nice pair of aces on the right-hand table. Absolutely a-okay with the 3-bet. Big fan of that. Putting money in when ahead is never going to be a bad thing. And excuse me as my mouth goes dry. Inachi is going to call, I think, off memory, as he wastes my camera time. Yes, you fold. My apologies. Yeah, just to say we like 3-bet, we like isolating there, and it's overall just nothing spectacular, but good solid play, and we're a big fan of that kind of stuff. So yeah, again, punishing loose opens when we're atop a range is definitely going to be our positive kind of thing. Left-hand table, double suited hand, kind of raggedy, not particularly connected, and I would favour a fold here and open if the flush, the club flush was queen high. That way, we can make 2 high flushes. It gives the hand a lot more punch. With just the 8 high flush, it's almost a single suited hand with blockers, which we kind of touched on previously. How valuable is an 8 high flush? Whereas queen high flush, has significantly more value. There are going to be instances where that actually can be the nut flush, although not super likely, but certainly possible. And yeah, it's just going to have a lot more playability, and we can extract a lot more value from it, further down the line. So John's going to set out some tables. We are going to skip forward to when he sits back in. Yep. So left-hand table, Raggedy King with a weak suit, totally cool with a fold there. We had a king high flush draw we could potentially defend there, although it's a little loose. We want to be defending 40% multi-way. When there's even more people in the pot, multi-way I'm kind of referring to two other people. When there's even more, there's going to be four other people here. You can even dial it back a bit and maybe take it from about 40%, dial it back to about 30. And just it sounds fairly obvious, but just the more people in the pot, just sort of trim the bottom parts of that range. So yeah, we like the fact that he's showing some more discipline there and just finding folds in spots that necessarily he wasn't previously, because he's being offered a very good price, but that he's finding discipline folds and not putting himself in awkward spots post flop that he was in the previous series on the Betfair series, and a lot of Omaha is just making sure that you don't put yourself in those awkward spots post flop as much as you can. And yeah, just trying to make your life as easy as possible. Left hand table, double suited hand with a pair and some connectivity, perfectly fine to open. We don't want to open too many low pairs, but when we're double suited and connected, we will be. Single suited, it gets a bit ropey. Rainbow wouldn't be opening at all. But yeah, we're a big fan of that. Again, 3-betting the aces, getting an overcall. This guy seems to like overcalling. We've seen it a few times in the previous part. So again, we've been making a note that he seems to be fairly loose and not particularly strong pre-flop. In terms of some of the decisions he's making, overcalling 3 bets out of position is going to be a losing play. We get a pretty good flop, and we would be considering firing on this board. We're going to touch on the right hand table in a second, wind it back. John goes for the check, and I think this seems a little bit of a mistake to me, to be honest. I think if you're going to 3-bet, this is about as good a board as you can have that's not containing an ace. It's very dry. We only really have to worry about our opponent having a 5, given we have the 10 blocker, blocking 10's full. So something around a third to 40% on the flop seems entirely reasonable. Build the pot, maybe get a street value off kings, maybe get a street value off queens. Seems absolutely fine to me. We're in position. I understand he's checking for pot control, but I think this is a spot where our range is just so strong that we don't need to pot control, and we can find out pretty quickly if our opponent happens to have a 5. If we check, then we can start leveling ourselves of, is our opponent bluffing because we checked and we kind of artificially cat range in a spot we don't have a cat range. And also there's a possibility of, if a jack, a queen, a king comes off and our opponent starts betting, are we skilled enough and competent enough to put our opponent on, a turn set and being able to, potentially not lose too much money in that spot. So I think extracting a street value on flop is absolutely fine. As it is, he basically gets the perfect turn. He goes for a check again. I guess this check makes more sense than the flop check, in that it conceivably hits our range a lot. That being said, it's very difficult to see if we check turn how on earth we can get value on river. I think even some 5s check on turn, just because aces is a decent chunk of our range. So yeah, I would be fine with betting here. The ace is also a pretty good bluff card. The times we have rundowns, hands like jack 9 8 7, that kind of stuff. Hands like king queen jack can use the ace as a bluff while having some equity as well. So again, I would size down. I would go on the smaller side. The bluffs would not need to bet particularly large either. If you do have the hands I just mentioned, you could use those as bluffs for balance, and almost using the fact that we can have 3 aces in this spot and our opponent never can as a way to control the pot and potentially buy it. I'm going to run the tape, and John is going to raise river. The problem he has is his hand is kind of face up when he does it. Again, I would size down. I really don't see how we're getting called with pot size bet here, but yeah, I think he's played it too passive early in the hand, on flop and turn, and then he's gone far too aggro on river. So just trying to find the middle ground, and also, if we're firing these kind of boards, there's going to be a lot of times we 3-bet we don't hit boards, and being able to fire these kind of boards for 30-40% is going to allow us to fire other boards where we haven't continued, haven't hit a hand. Let's say we 3-bet a hand like ace queen jack 10 single suited or double suited. We get a 3-5-5 board, we can just fire that for 40%. And because we do that with our aces, because we do that with our kings, it gives us balance and allows us to um, apply range advantage in those spots and allow us to potentially win hands and apply pressure with the weaker parts of range. So we're just going to rewind the hand on the right-hand table. So John has got a double suited, somewhat connected hand in the big blind. It is a bit raggedy though, truthfully. It's basically three connected cards and a dangler. If we're going to play this, I would prefer to have like a 10 high version, something like 10-8-7-3 double suited, something along those lines. It's got a little bit more of a punch. So this is probably just about a fold, but it's pretty marginal. I can understand why he calls. It's not the worst call in the world. He gets a pretty good flop, all things considered. And yeah, absolutely love the check call line. He can never extract value by raising. He's capping range somewhat in a spot where he's actually towards the top of his bluff catch range. So yeah, we like the fact that it's inducing our opponent to fire a couple of streets, potentially try and take him off, potentially overvalue hands like King 10, sets, two pairs, that kind of stuff. Comes to river, this is like the one point I would make is you have an awkward spot on river if your opponent fires. I don't think your opponent's going to fire three streets with the aforementioned sets, two pairs, and straights. So in that point, we're suddenly in a spot where our opponent has either an incredibly strong flush or the king blocker. So I think when it comes to river, if opponent's prepared to fire all three streets, we kind of have to side fold. But what I would say at these stakes is people are rarely balanced in that instance, and if you take this line, your opponent is quite likely to fire one and give up, or fire two and give up, as opposed to firing all three streets and hoping to get it through. Just because these, as population, these pools tend to be quite loose passive. You're likely to get called down by hands that are non-nutted, and as such, those bluffs lose a lot of fold equity that they would have at higher stakes. As it is, it goes check, check. John's extracted the maximum amount of value, and he, I believe, has allowed King 10 to overplay for a street, and he's got a bit of value, which, yeah, again, pretty happy with how he's played that. Don't think you ever get any more value. So yeah, we're a big fan of how he played it. It's kind of like whenever you're reviewing John, it's kind of in a way, it's somewhat frustrating because you see stuff like this that's played well, and you can really see him, maximizing value. And there's a couple of hands later on as well where we see him extract max value, and you're very impressed with what he's doing. You're very happy with what he's doing, and then you see the 5-3-3 do stuff, and your head is in your hands, thinking, how can a man who plays that hand that well suddenly revert back to playing rubbish, junky hands? So, yeah, but with a bit of work, cut out the junky stuff. Focus on the really value-heavy stuff that he's doing here, whether it be putting things correctly in a bluff catch range and allowing people to overplay, or really extracting value when he has value hands, and he's going to see his win rate shoot through the roof. So, definitely the seeds of a good win rate are here. It's just tweaking things slightly. I'm a lot happier with what I'm seeing in this video than I was in the original 4-part Betfair series. I think there's been a good amount of progression, and we'll touch on that in the final thoughts, the wrap up, at the end of this video. John's going to open on the round table. What I would say is it's probably a little loose. I like the fact that he's applying pressure with his button range, that he's widened it a bit. I think this is a double suited open. I don't think it's a single suited open. Small thing just to touch on. But in general, opening buttons, he's going to get a lot of calls in this kind of population pool, not too many 3-bets, and he's just going to be able to pick up on a lot of flops, which is going to greatly help his win rate. This is probably a tad too far, but in general, it's going to be a very positive thing. So yeah, we're happy that he's applying a pressure, with his button range. Maybe that's a little too far though, but as a general concept, we're happy with what he's doing. I'm gonna skip it forward, and yeah. So this is kind of like coming back to what I was saying about, in a way, John is quite frustrating at times because we've seen him play a hand particularly well, and now we've seen him 3-bet and under the gun open, out of position with a weakish ace, single suited. It has some connectivity, but we have the suitedness, although it's single suited. Do we have connectivity? We don't have 4-card connectivity. We have 3-card connectivity, and it's somewhat low connectivity. And do we have high card status? Well, we have 1 high card. And when we're thinking of high card status, we're really thinking of 3 or 4. But 3 is kind of like the minimum when we're considering whether a hand qualifies as a high card. So again, we have run it through our oracle just to illustrate the point, and we input it against a 12% range, which I think is a reasonable open range. Again, hot and cold, it's not doing particularly well. Flop equity distribution is average, although again, we're not just focusing on where the 33% threshold is, we're also thinking of the shape of the graph. Ideally we want to graph something along here, not sort of sloping down. We're really looking for hands that have really good equity, and then sort of like the last little bit drops off rather than a continuous curve such as this. We're going to input it against a 16% range, assuming our opponent's maybe a tad wider. We can actually see that we're actually doing worse against a wider range, just because a lot of the 4% difference between 12 and 16% range is going to be the medium strength aces. Hands like ace 10, 9, 7 single suited. And again, these hands are going to have kicker problems. And again, some of the cards within those combos are going to actually cover our cards, meaning that our opponent has the potential to make higher 2 pairs than us, and covering outs, in the times we need to hit them. Again, flop distribution, it's kind of like continuous drop off. It's not the nice sort of bell curve that we would like, half a bell kind of thing. If you think of a standard deviation graph. So yeah, this is just too wide. Even against a player that's playing super loose, we've touched on how we beat super loose players, and that's just by playing value ranges very hard and expanding value ranges post-flop. It's not by taking medium strength hands and inputting them into 3-bet ranges and trying to outplay them. So I think we've just gone too far on this. It's another point that I'll touch on in the final wrap-up, that I think this is a general point. Again, Tapas is overcalling, which makes this kind of even worse if we've got someone who's very keen to overcall 3-bets, and we can assume that our opponent from under the gun has never folded 3-bets, so it's very unlikely to be occurring. As played post-flop, absolutely fine with how we played it post-flop, but the point is it really shouldn't be a 3-bet spot. The stack to pot shouldn't be like this. And we've kind of created a rod for our own back, really, with this particular play. So yeah, just sort of, we need to rein that kind of stuff in and remove it. And from one hand that he played particularly poorly to a hand he's played particularly well, which is why I said it in a way it's kind of frustrating, because you can see you can see the real positives, and you're just trying to trying to remove the negative stuff and then sort of just be left with the good stuff. So it's the left-hand table, beautiful hand on the button. It's absolutely fantastic. Real top of range kind of stuff. And it's going to get folded around, and John's going to open the button. Nothing more to be said. Absolutely standard. If we're opening 50%, this would be an under the gun open. It's that good of a hand. And we're going to get 3-bet, and John decides to go for the call. We like the call. 1, we have position. 2, I think when we 4-bet, a lot of our opponents, if our opponent starts calling 4-bets, it's going to contain a lot of we're going to fold out a lot of stuff that we're actually beating, although with this opponent that's maybe a little less likely, but we're going to fold out the stuff we're crushing, and we're going to be left with sort of aces and kings, which are going to rejam on us and have a huge equity advantage, just from the nature of hand composition and how our hand would be covered in terms of the ace and the king. So yeah, love the call. Hand plays pretty well post flop. It's got a good flop equity distribution, so we don't really have to worry about it at that point. It's not it's not polarized in any sense. We flop top pair, we have a backdoor flush draw, we have a backdoor straight draw. Opponent sizes up, and John is going to call. Again, love the call. We don't need to get stacks in with just one pair. What are we getting it in versus likely aces and kings? Not much else seems all that plausible. I mean, I guess disaster scenario as our opponent happens to have 3 queens, but that's super unlikely, although not impossible. For our opponent's bluffing, we're fine for him to continue to bluff. There's quite a few ways for us to improve. We can improve on any card higher than a 9. We can improve on clubs. So there's a lot of ways for us to potentially improve, and the times that we don't and our opponent barrels, we can just put them on top of range and find a fold with just a 1-pair hand. So we're allowing ourselves to not go broke with 1-pair hand, but also allowing our opponent to overplay in the instance that we improve. So we're a big fan of this call. And we get one of the best turns we can possibly imagine. Um, so we turn two pair, a gut shot to the nuts and the nut flush draw. At this point, we're just basically thinking, how do we get the money in? If our opponent had led, we'd just be jamming, just getting money in. The SPR so low that we wouldn't even, if our opponent happens by some miracle to have us beat, say la vie, let's try and hit one of our many outs. As there's opponent's checked, when our opponent checks, we're likely going to be thinking aces, potentially like a hand like ace jack 10 that's just randomly barreled flop and for whatever reason decided not to continue on turn. From his point of view, the king does hit us. There's going to be a decent chunk of king queen in our range. But against a player who's calling a lot, then we definitely, expect to get called. John sizes for 9.4, so it's around 2/3. We like this sizing. I think potting here isn't going to be folding out too much. By firing 2/3, he's charging a cheaper price in a spot where he has huge range advantage. But it's almost like a fallacy because in effect it leaves our opponent so little behind that it's going to lead to one of two things, which either our opponent forced to jam or our opponent calls and then kind of has to call off just about every river just because he's going to be getting such a phenomenal price on river. So it's almost in a way an inducing bet. That just the way the stack sizes play out, just being the stack sizes are a little awkward from that point of view. But yeah, it just prices in worse while also effectively pricing them in on river as well. So yeah, we love this sizing. We think it's pretty much as good as it could be. I mean, it's pretty much what I think I would have sized. Anything around the 9 range would be absolutely fine. And our opponent's going to call, which is a little surprising, truthfully. I'd have thought this would be probably a jam fold spot, but he finds call. Pretty good river, all in all. And this is what I mean about John's price the guy in at this point. He's getting better than 4-1 on river. So in fact, once John bets, it's going to be closer to 5-1. And yeah, just a really well played hand. The only thing I would say is John left him a cent behind. Don't be that kind, I guess, would be the only criticism I could possibly have in this hand. But yeah, he's just played it really well. We're a big fan. This is more of what we want to see, him playing value hands for value, extracting max value, and not screwing around with the other stuff. But yeah, he's pretty much valuing the guy, and that's what we like to see. So yeah, we don't get to see what the guy actually had. I don't think John actually goes and has a look, but probably the way that this guy's playing is probably going to be aces. Maybe aces with a king 10 type thing. So I just skipped past the jack. Yeah, just say this can be an open when we're suited to the king in cutoff. Yeah, it's a reasonably minor point, but probably would raise it. Suited to the jack is probably a fold just about, although you could still open in some tighter games. But yeah, absolutely fine with that. So left on the table, fold and sixes, absolutely fine fold, but it's just going to illustrate the point that if we're folding that, why are we playing the 5-3-3 deuce? This is an infinitely stronger hand, in terms of raw equity, and actually in terms of flop equity distribution, they're both terrible hands, but this is marginally less terrible. So yeah, if we're folding this kind of stuff, it just kind of really illustrates that we should be folding the other kind of really junky stuff, and not to overvalue the low connectivity that we've been talking about. So yeah, I mean, a hand like this, for example, would play better than the 5-3-3 deuce, and we'd never consider opening this. So yeah, and that would have better suitedness, better high card, and better connectivity. So yeah, just a general point. I don't want to harp on continuously about him playing low junky stuff, but it is something he really needs to focus on because at the moment he's just effectively missing and check folding flops. But there are going to be instances where he actually hits a hand and has horrendous reverse implied odds. In his instances where he's made bottom set and bottom 2 pair, and it's going to cost him a lot of money. And that's not the outcome that we're looking for, really. So yeah, just a few more hands, and then we'll wrap it up with the overall thoughts. So we have the double suited king connected, and we also have the double suited ace on the right hand table. So we are just going to let's say we'll cover the left-hand table first, and then we'll go on the right-hand table. I think that seems like a good way to do it. So we like the defend. This is definitely going to be in 40% range. Bit too weak to 3-bet, but we're absolutely fine with the way he's played it. And our opponent pots. Now, I can kind of understand why John decides to go for a call here, just because his opponent's kind of tilting and like table dynamics. But I think when we have no nut outs here, if we hit the jack, we don't make the nut straight. If we hit the 10, we don't. There's no way for us to make a nut full house. Barring runner. We do have to worry about spades. Effectively, it's difficult to know what we want to hit, and it's very unlikely that our 10 is good, so we will have to hit. So I think just letting this go is going to be the default play, especially when out of position. Although our opponent's tilting and we're reasonably confident he's not the sharpest tool in the box, he is also still betting into two people for pot. So we do have to respect that to an extent. He goes check on turn, sorry, and it's an interesting spot on river. John's actually made a straight. Now, it's going to be interesting to ask John in forums or any kind of like follow-up to this video whether he's betting as a bluff here or as for value. I have to assume it's for value. It's an interesting one, and I think if you are going to bet river, it's probably the size you would use, just as a blocker bet. Against better opponents, they're going to recognize it's a blocker bet, and although they can't really credibly rep a range by raising, you can't credibly rep a calling range by betting this size either, so it becomes like a really interesting metagame. I mean, the one thing I would say is that it prevents your opponent from bluffing river. That being said, if your opponent checks turn, how likely is he to have a value hand you're worried about? So this hand probably is more of a bluff catcher than this, but if you are going to bet, the blocker bet is probably the way to do it. I'm not really sure what you would be hoping to extract value from. Potentially you're going to extract value off 9-8, potentially, maybe. I mean, occasionally you value only yourself against ace-king, which is plausible. Can you get called by two pair? The only real two pairs that make sense are like queen-jack and jack-10, both rivered. So it's an interesting spot. I kind of understand why he's blocker bet it. I don't think he should even be in this river spot to begin with, for the record. He should be just folding flop. But it's another instance where John's basically kind of played his way out of a spot that he didn't need to be in. So we got to give him credit for being able to play his way out of it, but we don't really need to be in these instances to begin with. So we're going to jump back to the right hand table and cover the double suited ace. It's a loose open from UTG +1. It's okay. It's kind of right at bottom of range. The fact we have a 10 high flush is going to help versus if we were an 8 high flush. That does make a difference, albeit small. So it's an okay open. Nothing more, nothing less, really. If we're playing tables where a lot of hands are going multi-way, then we could potentially cut it from range, but it is kind of a pulling hand in the sense that it has one nut flush, so maybe you would still input it, potentially. You'd want it a bit more connected, but it's reasonable. I'm going to skip forward a little bit and just cover the last few hands. There we go. Yeah, we like the fact John's folding the 8s. Good discipline there. It does further prove if he's overfold. If he's folding to 3 bets when in position, why is he calling them when out of position? So something to focus on. And on the right hand table, we have the double suited 10s. It's an okay defend in this spot. It's not an enormous mistake to fold. It's not an enormous mistake to call. It's probably about EV neutral, I would imagine. It's not stunning. We have to be careful of what we're doing post flop. We have to consider how much value we have from the flush draws when it goes multi-way. Probably not so much. We have value from 10s. We have value from straight draws. I'd be okay with folding it. Big blind, it would absolutely be a defend. Small blind, we could potentially be folding if we wanted to. Excuse me. Left-hand table, too wide of an open. We'd put this in the cutoff range. It's just a little too weak. If we're going to be playing the double-suited aces here, which we want to be, we want higher ones. We prefer something like ace-king 9-6, although less connected. It has the high card status, working for it. The 9 is just about what we'd accept for a high card in that instance. Of the connected stuff, we're thinking more ace 10 9 7, ace 9 8 7, that kind of stuff double suited. It also makes higher flushes, of course. You know, if we had the higher cards we have, like that would be the reason the ace king 9 6 is going to play better, just because we're going to have higher flushes than the 7 high flush. You know, if it's the king high flush in conjunction with the ace high flush, you know, that's even better. But you know, that's why it's going to show a better result long term, as opposed to the ace 7 5 3. You know, just kicker problems, higher flush draws, that kind of stuff. He did concern me actually when I watched this the first time when that video paused, because I thought it was about to crash, but thankfully not. So yeah, just a few, 4 more hands, and as I put 3 fingers up, which is random, and then we'll go over the overall thoughts. So the first hand is going to be on the right-hand table. It's the ace king jack 4. Yes, he decides to 3-bet here. It's potentially a tad wide. Like if this were a cut-off button relationship, we'd be far happier with it. If he had an ace high flush draw, we'd be a bit more happy with it. Like the idea is overall trying to punish 3-bets. I'm far happier with him 3-betting this versus the ace 8 7 4 that he was doing earlier, or it could have been ace 7 6 4. I forget which exactly the combo of it. But the hand where he's 3-betting from small blind versus under the gun. We're far happier that he's 3-betting this sort of stuff with high card status, with suited status, with some connectivity. Granted, there is the one dangler, but this works far better as a hand. You know, it's a bit of a pushing hand as well, and it's going to perform far better than the aforementioned weak ace. So John decides check here, and this is an overall point. We touched on earlier in the instance where he had aces and checked the 10-5-5 board as to the benefit of betting that kind of board to allow you to bet this kind of board with a hand such as this. So yeah, we have enormous range advantage here. It's very unlikely our opponent has a 5. You know, very unlikely our opponent has 3s full. We have to worry about some flush draws, but they're going to be less keen to get an enormous amount of money in on paired boards. So again, we can bet something around 40%, maybe 50% a pot. Expect to win it a good chunk of time. Times we don't. You know, we're going to get called by hands like jacks and queens, potentially, you know, against weaker players, in which case we still have the value of the ace and the king, or potentially can just 2-barrel and expect to pick up. So yeah, I think if we're going to raise this kind of stuff, you know, we have to be prepared to fight these boards. We have a huge number of overpairs in our range when we 3-bet, and as such, we have to take advantage of that. And continuing in this spot, you know, we don't need to go particularly large, but we're just going to be printing money by 3-betting these kind of low boards, which is unlikely for our opponent to hit and where we have range advantage. As it is, John checks, and the king comes off, and he decides to fire a sizing similar to what I was suggesting on the king. You know, he gets it through, which is fine, but I think he could have done it straight earlier and just exploit the range advantage and not need to turn the king. You know, in essence, not require him to realize the equity. I think that's probably the better way to go. And just general point, if you're going to be 3-betting that kind of hand, just following it up post flop on boards that favor you is going to be the way that you kind of, you know, it's like the 1-2 punch that's going to print you the money. The 3-bet, you know, on its own won't do. 10-9-8-7. Bit of a ropey open. We'd be opening this double suited. We wouldn't be opening this single suited. It's a very interesting hand though. So in a way, I'm happy he opened it just because it does some really interesting post flop stuff. Again, we want it suited higher than the 8. You know, if we're going to be playing the single suited version, which again I think is a bit light. You know, we want it to be, you know, the higher the suitedness, the better, effectively. So we get an iffy flop from our point of view. Does hit our range, but it is also going to hit the calling range of an under the gun +1 player who's going to be playing, you know, a tight part of range here. And John decides to c-bet. Now, first things first, I think if you're going to c-bet here, you probably want to size up a tad, just because it's an incredibly scary board. If you had 3 aces, if you had 3 queens, if you had ace queen, you would size up, try and charge the draws. You know, I would not be c-betting here. I think this is a spot that's fine to just give up. You know, what do we really want to turn? You know, even if we hit the jack and hit the straight, there's still a chance that we happen to have, you know, found a horrible reverse implied odds spot. John is going to get called, and all sorts of mischief is going to ensue. So the deuce is an enormous brick, and now John sizes up. And I actually think this, if you're going to take this line, then sizing up here makes sense. Now this is going to be enormously player dependent. Now, for example, if we're going to be playing this guy here, I would never dream of doing this because he's going to call you so fast to make your head spin. If you're going to fire a turn, you basically have to be prepared to fire the rivers that brick off. You can't fire a king, you can't fire a jack, you can't fire a 10, you can't fire a club. And probably not an ace as well, even though it does hit your range. Your opponent's going to be calling with a lot of ace queen and ace nine and just going to boat up and just snap call you. So we have to be aware of what kind of rivers we're going to be firing. John decides to fire a river, and he's not firing this for like the value of the two pair. He's turning this into a bluff. Once upon a time, I had three aces kind of thing. Now, John doesn't have any blockers here, which is to his detriment. And he really sizes up here. And I ummed and ahed about what the pros and cons of sizing up. I think if you were trying to extract value off a hand like, with a hand like aces or queens, I think you would actually size down a touch just because all the draws miss. That being said, if you size down too far, you will get called by ace queen and queen nine. So I would probably favor something around the 75 to 80%. It's still large enough that it looks like you're trying to extract value without being too greedy and without exposing yourself to the unnecessary risk of a pot bet. This is hugely player dependent. I'm kind of impressed he got it through, to be honest with you. It does show that John's got a good amount of balance as to value and bluff hands. Certainly this is not a default play. Certainly this is not something I would advocate doing with particularly high frequency, just because we're playing in pools where there's going to be a lot of passive play and a lot of calling. But he does actually get it through, and I assume his opponent just thought he was very greedy going for that sizing, and they ended up tanking. And yeah, nice little pot that he's swaggle foosed off someone. But yeah, definitely, it's an okay play to make once in a while, but yeah, certainly not a default play, and certainly not a spot we can exploit. If we have something like, a couple of jack blockers, a couple of king blockers, just because it's going to reduce, so many more sort of drawing combos, that would probably make the bluff significantly more likely to succeed. So left-hand table, the king, queen, 10, 5, single suited. John's going to defend, and yeah, it's an absolutely fine defend. It's multi-way. We want about a 40% range. It's definitely going to be in that. It's going to be sort of top 25% type thing. So yeah, we like the call. That being said, he decides to defend this. He decides to check all this flop, and this is just, again, this is just little ropey. It's just adjusting ranges. Top pair and a gut shot. Opponent's firing into three people. You just have to be aware that's not a strong enough hand. Even though they size down a bit, which is a little suspicious on their end, to be honest. What are we hoping to turn? We're really, again, I think he's just, we don't want to be playing this kind of stuff out of position. We don't control the size of the pot. We don't control the SPR. And yeah, just a general point. I would be folding this and, moving on by life. Last hand is the kings. And John is going to 3-bet this. So if I remember correctly, there's going to be a raise and there's going to be a call in front. Inichi's going to call on button, and John's going to 3-bet. So this is going to play better as a heads-up hand. That being said, can we get this heads up? And I would imagine probably not. Our opponent here is raising under the gun +1, so it's very unlikely they're going to be folding much of their opening range. If there's only one open, we'd be far better with this 3-bet. We got far more, chance of ISOing it, in effect. So we've input it into Odds Oracle, just the final use of Odds Oracle in this video. And yeah, so we put it in a 50% range, based on the information we have when we 3-bet. So we put in 15% range from under the gun, put in a 10 to 40% range six-handed of the button, which I think is probably reasonable. We could maybe even make that tighter, more like 8 to 40, just because it's a very tight range. It's going to raise an under the gun +1 raise, and you see just three-handed. It's going to perform. Basically, we have exactly a third equity, and in spots like this, where fairly poor flop equity distribution, it's quite a polarized hand. We'd be absolutely fine with just calling. in effect. The results we're going to see by three betting are it's going to go call call. We've bloated the pot, we've bloated the SPR, and we're out of position with a hand that doesn't flop stunningly well, given they are weak kings. If we're going to three bet kings, we want something a bit more connected, something like king, king, queen, 10 would be absolutely fine with the suit. That just because that's going to play better post flop. And the nightmare scenario is we get four bet and we have to fold. So as nitty as it sounds, I'm actually okay with just calling here and playing for the value of the kings. Not something I'm going to do particularly often, but I think this is one of the instances where it's going to happen, just because I'm resigned to the fact I can't get the hand heads up, and as such, I'm just going to kind of lower my lower my risk in the hand, and also the times that I happen to hit a king, maybe my opponents are going to start questioning how I can have top set. As played, it's absolutely fine. He decides to check through on a board that's about as bad as we can get. We don't actually see the result because the video is going to cut out at the end, but he checks flop, he checks turn. I have to assume he's check folding river, which is going to be absolutely a-okay as far as it's played. And yeah, just an overall point as to three bets we're making against in a heads up spot versus in a multi-way spot, do have to differ. We're going to have to three bet a tighter range when we know the hand will go multi-way. So let's cover overall thoughts. So let's focus on the positive to start with. I think it's definitely a better standard of play than the Betfair series. I think that's immediately apparent just by watching. You could have watched it without me talking for the hour or so on each video, and you would have instantly seen improvement, which is definitely encouraging. We like the fact he's playing tighter ranges. There was certainly some stuff in the earlier videos that was very questionable and going to lose some money. Now he's not there yet. There are still some things we've got to remove from range, but as an overall concept, the tighter ranges are, although a work in progress, they're definitely on the way there, and we're happy to see that. We like the balance of his bluffs when he has range advantage. Don't overdo it like the last hand potentially. He's going to be player dependent, and just a general point. So stuff we think John needs to work on. First thing, don't overvalue the rubbish low connectivity, 5-3 deuce kind of stuff. Remove it from range. It's not going to work at all. Just basically, it's a common thing we see at micros from a lot of people. I've coached quite a few people who have had the same problem when they first approached me. A lot of people overvalue that low connectivity. It's by no means a fault unique to John, but it's something we have to remove. Three bets of the weak and medium strength aces, cut those out. They're not going to perform as well. There's going to be times we have kicker problems with it and could potentially get ourselves in awkward spots with a lower SPR, so it's going to cost us more money. It's just not going to perform as well. Something like King Queen Jack 9, King Queen Jack 8, King Jack 10 9 is going to perform much better as a three bet, than an Ace 7 6 4. Just because it's going to flop better and it's got more synergy and it works better as a hand. And remember, sort of gaps at the top rather than gaps at the bottom. An Ace 7 6 4 has the gap at the top. Last point from the previous hand. Consider the differences between heads up and three bet spot, heads up and multi-way three bet spots. Just tighten the range multi-way. Not a massive thing, but fine. Also a point about the three betting medium strength aces. I've seen with a few people that I've coached that if they're three betting that kind of stuff, they also start sneaking in some medium pairs in that stuff like jacks and nines, tens and eights, nines and sevens even. Single suited and rainbow I've even seen. Cut that out as well if you happen to be doing that and I just haven't seen it on this video. That's not going to show a profit either. It's polarized and the pairs just aren't strong enough. Don't overdo. Don't overcall your three bets. We've talked previously why calling a three bet is losing play, but a less losing play than surrendering the 3.25 big blinds that we put in pre. If we've only put one big blind in, if we haven't put anything in, we're going to be losing more by calling. Basically, when we call three bets, we're basically saying that we're not going to lose, 300 odd big blinds per 100. We're going to lose closer to 120, 140. If we've only put one big blind in, 100 big blinds per 100, we're actually going to lose more by calling than by just surrendering the big blind. So, general point, overcalling three bets is going to be a losing play. And we're not closing action, so there's going to be instances where you have to get four bet and have to surrender the hand as well, which is going to, greatly increase, the loss there as well. Tighten calling ranges in multi-way spots post flop. You know, we saw the top pair and gut shot, that sort of stuff. Just you know, really consider multi-way. The more people in the pot, stronger our hand has to be to continue. And top pair and weak draw is just not going to cut it. But overall, very much improved. Very happy to see some improvement. I would like to see you focus on more on the sort of value side of the range. You know, we think the ace queen king jack hand that you played was fantastic. Focus more on that. Focus on extracting value with more of those hands rather than you know, monkeying around with the lower junky stuff. And also focusing on exploiting range advantage with 3-bets when we have the high connected cards that haven't hit, but you know, we have range advantage like the 5-3-3 board, you know, where we can basically very credibly rep over pairs and you know, just exploit and you know, we have great forward equity there essentially. But overall, much improved. Still some work to be done, but definitely steps in the right direction. So some positives there for sure. If you haven't already, go and check out John's progress on both bankroll challenges on the PokerVIP forums. The links will be below, so go check those out. You know, you can also watch these videos on the PokerVIP. He's commenting his thoughts on individual hands as to what he was thinking at the time, so you can get some feedback from the guy who's actually played them, which is, you know, very educational, etc. So that being said, I wish him the best in this bankroll challenge as I have in the previous one. Good luck with both of them. Sure, they'll go fantastically, and you know, I await your progress with bated breath. And with that being said, you know, I've enjoyed reviewing that stuff. So yeah, best of luck, and I hope I will see you guys in a bit.